Hey guys, welcome to this workshop week tutorial. I'm Aurélie, a lettering artist from the Gold Coast in Australia. I am passionate about helping other creatives improve their lettering skills and also sell their own digital products online. So if you're interested, make sure to check out my website. Now in this video, we're going to be doing a wood letter, but before we begin, make sure you have downloaded your assets. Underneath this video, you should find a link to download your mini brush set, your color palette, and your PNG template. Now that you're ready, let's get started. All right, so this is the piece we're going to be making today. But before we begin, we need to download our assets. I have provided a folder with 3 different files. The first one is just a PNG with the artwork. And then you have 2 Procreate files. One is your brush set and the other one is your color palette. To install those, simply tap on them and they will open automatically with Procreate. Now we can begin by opening the template in Procreate. So if you tap on the first file and then on that little arrow on the top right corner, you should be able to find Procreate within your apps and it's going to send it to Procreate. Now if you open Procreate and if you go back to your gallery, it should be the first one there. So you're going to open your template, and when you open it, you might not see anything because it's white. So open up your layers and change the background color to black. So that's one way of doing it. You can also create a new document and import the PNG. I'm working with a 3000 by 3000 pixels canvas. First thing we're going to do is add some color. Let's just go back to your layers and create a new layer that you're going to slide down just underneath your W template. Let's rename that background, and we're going to fill this layer entirely with pink. And now I'm going to rename this layer and call it W template. Now I'm going to duplicate this layer, grab the one underneath, and I'm going to change its color to the second brown in the color palette. And because it's underneath, you might not be able to see it. Let's just hide that top layer for now. And I'm just going to fill it with color. So it's just one big shape. You should have something like this. I'm actually going to change the color of that top layer to that light cream color. Now we're ready to create the dimensional effect. I'm going to select that brown layer, duplicate it, select the one at the bottom once again, and I'm going to change the color to that dark brown this time. So you might not be able to see it, but it should be brown. I'm going to duplicate it a third time. I'm going to simply move it below, just somewhere around here. Now I'm going to grab the perfect inking brush from the brush set I have provided. I'm just going to connect the edges with a straight line. You might need to lower the size of your brush. Just going to directly connect the corners of your shape. And you should be able to draw a second line and just feel that shape. So whenever you draw a line, you can just draw a not perfect line and you hold your pencil on your canvas so you don't lift it off, and that should make it a perfect straight line. That should be everything. Now we should be able to merge these 2 layers together. So remember we had the first dark brown that we duplicated and then the second one where we drew the dimensional effect. So let's just blend these 2 together. So you just pinch 2 layers together. So now you should have 3 layers, which is your dimensional effect, then your main shape, and then your stroke. And I might rename it W template stroke and W template dimension, just so that you guys can see better. All right, let's add a bit of shadow in the background. What we can do to create a shadow is actually grab all of those 3 layers and group them. So you have a group with all of your shapes and you're going to duplicate it, select the one at the bottom. You're going to flatten that group and then you're going to tap on it again and you're going to click select. And we're going to grab that dark purple from the color palette, Going back to the layers, tapping on the layer once again, you are going to click Fill Layer. And I'm going to hide it so you can see, but what it does is just going to change the color. Now, this layer, we're going to move it down to the right in the same direction as our dimensional effect. I'm going to move it somewhere around here, and I'm going to change the blending mode of the layer to multiply. So if you tap on the little N, which is normal, you can slide all the way up to multiply, and I'm going to lower the opacity of that layer, and let's go with 25%. Now I'm going to duplicate it once again because I like to play with two different layers of shadow. I think it looks more realistic. Let's just hide the bottom one first. So we're just going to work on the first layer of shadow, and I'm just going to add a bit of motion blur. So if you go Adjustment, Motion Blur, and again you can tap on your canvas and slide in the direction of your dimensional effects. So tap on the canvas and move in the same direction as my dimensional effect, and it's just going to blur the shadow and kind of soften it a little bit. And that's my first layer of shadow. So let's go back to that second one, and I'm going to lower its opacity so it's very subtle, probably about 15%, and I'm going to add some Gaussian blur this time, maybe about 5%. And I might even lower the opacity of that top layer once again. So we went with 25, but I'm going to go with 15. So they're both 15%. Now what I want to do is add some texture. So we're creating a wooden effect. So I'm going to create some clipping mask on every single shape and add a texture to it. So let's just select the stroke template and let's make it the same color. So it's all one unique color. And then I'm going to create a new layer, make it a clipping mask. So it should be attached to that stroke now. And I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. Now I'm going to select the wood texture brush from the brush set, and I'm going to pick the dark brown color. And here it's fairly simple, you're just going to add some texture. Then we're going to do the same thing for the main shape, so the main W template, and I'm going to create a new layer, make it a clipping mask, change the blending mode to multiply, and then I'm going to add some texture. It might look like it's just one shape now, which is totally okay. We're going to add some shadow in a minute. Now, last thing I'm going to do is add texture to that dimensional effect. So I'm selecting the layer dimension, creating a new layer, making it a clipping mask, and changing the blending mode to multiply. With the same brush, same color, I'm adding some texture. So it might be difficult to see on camera, but I have texture now. Now I'm going to add some shadow just underneath the stroke so that it makes it more visible. All we need to do for that is just duplicate that stroke layer, and we're actually going to make it a clipping mask on the shape underneath, so on that main W template. So tap on the layer, make it a clipping mask, again change the blending mode to multiply, and now if you move it, you should be able to see it. So it should be already looking pretty awesome. Now what I'm going to do is just change its color, because at the moment it's just the light brown, but I think it would look better if it was the dark brown. So let's just change the color just like that, very simple. And I'm going to add just a little bit of Gaussian blur so it looks a little bit softer. So within my adjustment, selecting Gaussian blur, and I'm just going to add 3%. So hopefully you have something that looks like this. First thing I'm going to do is add even more shadow on that dimensional effect. So I am going to create a new layer just above that texture that we added for the dimension. Make it a clipping mask once again and change the blending mode to multiply. Now I'm going to select the shading small brush, and I'm going to be working with the dark brown. Here, all I'm going to do, so you might have to lower the size of your brush, but all I'm going to do is add some shadow in those tiny little corner. And I'm really not trying to be too perfect, because I believe that if you make it a little bit inconsistent and imperfect, it's just going to make it look more like real wood. As you can see, I'm like kind of just like focusing in those tiny little corners of that dimensional effect, just like if it was the real thing. I'm just doing my best, really. When there's a sharp corner like that, what I like to do is grab the eraser and use the same shading brush, maybe make this brush a bit smaller, and I'm just gonna kind of make the corner look a little bit more sharp. So I'm just erasing a little bit of shadow. Might be a little bit difficult to see on camera, but hopefully my explanation makes enough sense. So I'm going to show you the before and after so you can see. So this is without the shadow and this is with it. Next thing I'm going to do is add even more shadow in the background. So you remember we added 2 layers of shadow, but I'm going to add a third one just above my shadow layer. So I've got 2. I'm going to create a new layer again, change the blending mode to multiply, and I'm going to select the dark purple. And I'm using the shading small brush again. Now, pretty much all I want to do is add even more shadow and deepen that shadow, but staying very close to my shape. You might even have to lower the opacity of the brush so you can kind of add shadow a little bit more gradually. So you want to be quite subtle. You don't want to add too much at once. And you can see I'm really focusing on those areas that are very close to the shape, like I'm not going away too much, just staying nice and close to my W. I might rotate the canvas so it's easier to draw. Always recommend rotating your canvas whenever you can. So you can see I'm gradually adding more, really focusing on those little corners. Great. I'll show you the before and after. That's before and after. So you can see it really makes it a bit more attached to the background, I would say. Now what I'm going to do is add some highlights. And I'm going to start by adding highlights on that stroke. So you should have your layer with your texture. Now I'm going to create a new clipping mask and change the blending mode to screen. So it's going to create a highlight. And I'm using the same color, so the same brown as the shape. And using the shading small brush again, I'm just going to add some highlights gradually once again, so that I can have more control. And the way I am positioning those highlights, it's quite simple actually. I am just positioning it wherever there is no shadow. So the shadow is here, you can see the shadow. So I'm going on the opposite side. I'll show you a few more examples so that makes more sense. But essentially, I'm just going to add the highlights on the left-hand side and the top side. So anything at the top or on the left is going to be hit by this imaginary light that is possibly somewhere around here. So I can see the shadow here, so that means I need to stop. If that doesn't make sense, I would suggest to just copy what I'm doing. And then hopefully it will click. It will also make a lot more sense once we add the shadow and you'll be like, oh, I see. I see what we're doing. And you can see that just by doing that, it's already adding quite a bit of volume, which is really, really cool. Now we're going to do the same thing, but adding some shadow. So let's just create a new layer again and make it a clipping mask. And instead of screen, we're going to go with multiply once again. And let's use the darker brown this time. And we're just going to go wherever we haven't added a highlight. So kind of like in the opposite side. So wherever you see that shadow here from the stroke, this is where you should position your shadow on the stroke. So I'm just trying to follow that. This is my reference. But again, it doesn't have to be perfect, because if it can be a bit irregular, that's going to make it look more real and less digital, which is what we want. Now what I want to do is add a bit more highlights on the dimensional effect. I think it's getting a little bit lost with all that shadow. So let's go back to the dimensional effect, and we're going to create a layer just above the shadow layer. Make it a clipping mask and change the blending mode to screen. I'm just going to kind of add some reflection. I'm just trying to go wherever I haven't added any shadow once again. So kind of like in any spots where there was no shadow is where I'm going to add some type of highlight or reflection. So you can see it's kind of like brightening up the artwork. Once again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I think if you can create some type of like random shape, like it doesn't have to be like a perfect gradient, it's going to look more real. I'm gonna add even more highlights, but this time on that main shape in the middle, so not the stroke, not the dimension, but the main W template. And we have that texture layer, we have that shadow from the stroke. So let's go in between those two, actually. That should work nicely. Change the blending mode to screen, and let's use that light brown. I'm going to make my shading brush quite big. I'm just going to gradually add some sort of highlight, but just at the top, almost like if it was just the light coming from here, adding a bit of light on top of it. Showing some big motion, big stroke, and you can see the difference. Probably a little bit too much, so I'm just going to lower the opacity of that layer to about 30%. You can see it's very subtle, but that already makes it look like a real object that's been photographed. So we should have something like this. With your layers, you should have hopefully your shape in one big group and then your shadow outside of that group. Now I'm going to create a layer above everything else and change the blending mode to add. I'm going to grab the highlight pen. With this pen, I'm going to just bring out some of the corners just to make it look like the light is here and it's making the wood shine a little bit. I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm going to pick the cream color from the color palette. Let's lower the opacity and the size of that brush to about maybe 50% opacity, and the size is about 10%. And that should create like a nice glow. And I'm not going to go around all of the shape. I'm just going to go on every corner that's on the top and on the left. And I'm also going to go on those shapes as well. And you can see how like I'm trying to be very subtle with my stroke, and I'm also trying to make it different sizes. So if you put more pressure, it's going to make it bigger. So I like to put very little pressure, then more pressure, and then releasing it. And also, what you can do when you have like a round corner like that is to draw your shape and hold it, and you should be able to kind of move it around if needed. You can even like lift your pen and go edit arc, which is going to allow you to move the nodes to reposition your shape. That's quite a useful tool in Procreate. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, like I always say, just try and replicate exactly what I'm doing. So feel free to take your time to pause the video, to rewind it, rewatch it. And hopefully the more you do it, the more it will start to make sense. And one day it will just click and you'll be able to do that without a tutorial. Again, I'm going to use the line, so I'm drawing a line which is not perfect, but if I hold my pen, I can make it a perfect line and reposition it. I think here it needs to be very subtle. All right, it's time to add those final details. So we're going to add some little pearls. I have provided the brush, which is called Metal Pearl. We're going to create a new layer on top of everything else once again and change the blending mode to add. I'm going to use that cream color. It will look very bright. That's because we're using the add layer. Here guys, you're more than welcome to position your pearls however you want. Put as many or as few pearls as you think is needed, but I'm just going to position mine like this. Now we're going to add some shadow underneath those pearls, so I'm going to simply do that by duplicating the layer, grabbing the one underneath and changing the blending mode to multiply. Obviously, because it's the cream color, it's not visible, but if you change it to the dark brown, make sure you filled all of the pearls. So if you drag your color and then you make sure you bring the threshold to 100%, it's going to recolor all of them. We're going to select that multiply layer and move it down underneath, maybe somewhere around here, kind of following the shadow that we have already made, imagining the light is coming from the top left corner, so somewhere around here. Now let's add a bit of Gaussian blur. And that's looking quite nice, but I think it could be a little bit deeper. So I'm just going to duplicate that layer. Simply duplicating a layer allows you to kind of double the intensity. So now I should have two layers that I'm just going to merge together because I don't need two layers of shadow. That should be your pearl. So top layer is the pearl and the shadow underneath. Just going to group that and rename this group pearls. I like to be quite organized with my layers. That's pretty much it for the wooden letter. Now I'm going to show you how I added the flowers. I know we only have 30 minutes together, so I might be rushing through this a little bit, but that's just so that I can share with you as much information as possible. If you need to, please feel free to pause. If you want to as well, feel free to ask me questions, but I'm going to go a little bit quicker now, so let's do it. So I'm going to create a new layer above everything else, and this time I'm going to grab the pink color and the perfect inking brush. I'm just going to imagine there is a plant growing from underneath that wooden letter. Something like that. And now what I'm gonna do is use the eraser and use the perfect inking brush to simply erase any part that I want to kind of place behind the letter. So I want to make it look like it's going behind. So I just need to do my best to erase it. Actually, here I need to draw more. So now I'm going to add the leaves, and I'm pretty much just using the pressure of that brush to draw my leaves. And I think it's just making it super easy, really making the whole process super simple. This brush is actually perfect to draw leaves. So I can draw the stem like that, and then one side of the leaf and another side, and then I fill it with color. Stem, one side, second side, and then paint. Once again, the more irregular, the better, because it's going to look more organic. If it's too perfect, it won't look too good. Okay, once you're happy with your leaves, we can just create a shadow. So to do that, same thing as before, we're just going to duplicate the layer, change the blending mode to multiply, and I'm going to change the color of that multiplied layer to purple and change the opacity to about 20%. Kind of move it below. Even 20% is too much, so maybe 14%, and add a little bit of Gaussian blur. Now I'm going to add a bit of highlight on the leaves, so creating a new clipping mask above the leaves, change the blending mode to screen, and I'm going to use the light pink with my shading small brush. And I'm just going to add some highlight, but just on half of the leaves. Great. And I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to add some shadow. So creating clipping mask, changing the blending mode to multiply, and using the pink color, I'm just going to add some shadow. On the second half. Again, I'm not going full opacity. I want this to be quite subtle. And I need to add a bit more shadow as well. So still on the same layer, I can use the dark purple and gonna add shadow just here. So making it look like it's kind of underneath that W. And it's coming from below. And you can add a bit of shadow on that stem as well. Awesome. What you can do also is create a new layer, change the blending mode to add, using the light pink, is also use the highlight pen and kind of make some of the corners on your leaves stand out a bit more like that. So that's just going to add a bit of a reflection. And again, I think that looks a bit more realistic as well, like it's there. It's not being just like drawn on top of things. Okay, now it's time to add the last thing, which is the flower. I'm going to show you that quickly. So I create a new layer and I'm going to draw it simply using the perfect inking brush. You can draw it anywhere because we're going to be copying it and pasting it. So I'm just creating one petal and then I'm going to duplicate it and just position it like that. And one more time, and I'm just going to do that 5 times until I have a shape that I like. And I think that's quite nice. So what we can do now is just merge those 5 petals together and create a new layer again. And using the yellow, I'm just going to draw a circle and hold it so that it creates an ellipse, and then tap with one finger to make it a perfect circle. Let's fill that with yellow. Okay, so you should have 2 shapes now, so the pink petals and the yellow center. But I'm going to start with shadows on the petals, so creating a new clipping mask set to multiply. I'm going to use the dark pink and the small shading brush. And I'm just going to add some shadow. And focusing on the center, creating 2 little shapes like that, so it looks like it's the inside of the petal. And then just creating a shadow for the actual yellow shape. And again, you can merge multiple colors, so adding a bit of purple as well, I think it looks nice. Now let's create some highlights on those petals. So create a clipping mask, set the blending mode to, let's try add for something different. I quite like that. Just focusing on edges. I really like this brush. It's kind of a nice grainy effect. Okay, now let's do the center, creating a clipping mask, setting the blending mode to multiply, and I'm gonna use the brown. And I'm kind of trying to create like a circle, but focusing on this area here. And then another clipping mask, set the blending mode to add. I'm gonna use that cream color, and this should look super awesome. Okay, so once you're happy with your flower, you're going to group it. Depending on the capacity of your iPad, you might be able to have enough layer to duplicate that group again. If not, that's totally okay. You can just draw the shadow manually or just like use the petals. But I'm going to duplicate it and do exactly like we did with the W. So I'm going to flatten the group underneath. I'm going to select it and I'm going to grab the dark purple and then fill layer. And that's going to be my shadow. I'm going to move it somewhere around here once again. Add a bit of Gaussian blur and change the blending mode to multiply and lower the opacity. So now that should be my flower that I can easily move around and position wherever I want. I would probably need to duplicate that again, and in order to have more layers, I might need to merge some of the layers together. So it's totally okay to merge every clipping mask with their main shape. So the petals and this will be fine. You can merge that together, but you won't be able to merge it with the shadow, because if you do that, it's going to use the blending mode of the bottom layer. So let's just keep it separate. So you should have your flower, which is a flat layer, and the shadow underneath. Now you don't have too many layers and you should be able to just copy it as many times as you want. All right, let's do one last thing, and that's probably one of my favorite. It's to add some sparkles, and to do that, I create another new layer on top of everything else. I change the blending mode to add, and I'm gonna grab the flare star, and you can use any color you want, but I'm gonna grab the cream color. I'm just gonna go ahead and stamp it wherever I think it needs some type of sparkle, and you guys are more than welcome to go crazy and add as many as you want. I like to kind of make them different sizes. You can also play with different opacities and just position it wherever you want. On those pearls, that would look nice, even on the flowers. All right, guys, we're pretty much done. One last little thing is to add some chromatic aberration and some noise. But before we do so, we need to duplicate the artwork because we don't want to flatten our work. So let's go back to our gallery. I'm gonna select the artwork and click duplicate, open my duplicate. Now, what I'm gonna do is group all of my layers together. I'm gonna select all of my layers and group them into one big group. So now you should have one group with absolutely all of your layers. Now, before you flatten it, you want to make sure there is no hidden layer. So if you have a layer that's hidden like that, make sure you get rid of it or you make it visible. You also want to make sure that at the very bottom of all of your layers, you have a layer that is full color. So your background should be one full color. If you have a layer that has transparency, it's probably gonna mess up everything. So now that all of your layers are ready to be merged together, you can tap on the group and click flatten. I like to duplicate this layer. Now in adjustment, I'm going to add a little bit of noise. I like to add about 5%. That's my personal preference, but feel free to do whatever you want. And I add a bit of chromatic aberration as well, about 5%. That's absolutely everything, guys. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I know the end was a little bit fast, so please feel free to let me know if you have any question. You're more than welcome to reach out on Instagram. Now, if you want to keep learning with me, I would recommend you check out my Lettering Lounge. It's a platform where you get plenty of free tutorials, tips and tricks, and all of my resources. And the best part is it's completely free, so I'll make sure to give you the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you guys in another video.